show a couple of different strategies in terms of illustrating your portrait. I know that in the video it primarily focuses on illustrating something that looks somewhat organic. When everybody came in last week, the conversation sort of focused on that. Let me launch that file so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Let's see. So this is the organic version where you will notice that a lot of the imagery that's being developed has more of an organic line or contour. So if we were to look at the original line work, it's going to look like this. So it has more of those organic curves that, the mounds on a face would have. But what I wanted to look at in this conversation was an approach where maybe there's some abstraction built into it. Instead of it following organic contours, maybe it's more of a geometric approach, or maybe it's a combination of organic lines and geometry. And that way you have some different strategies that you can try to apply in developing your portrait, okay? And you'll notice that when I've already started a couple of different outlines for the illustration. So you'll notice that when I activate this one, it doesn't have real contour-like qualities to it. You'll notice that it has more of a geometric-like approach to it. Here's another set of paths or lines that I've begun that also have more of a poly approach to it. Now, to do this technique, what you have to do is set up your software to activate a couple of features. So this was primarily illustrated with the pen tool. So this is our pen tool that we've looked at earlier in the quarter. And as you can see here, we're also outlining the information in red for the sake of contrast. Now, if you work with the pen tool, one of the things that you'll realize is that if I try to draw a shape, so let's say, for example, I want to capture a portion of this shadow underneath his eyelid. I want to capture a portion of this shadow, and I sort of want to draw it in a triangular shape. You'll notice that when I backtrack to the beginning of the triangle, so this is my first anchor, here's my second, there's my third. I'm going to backtrack to it. You're going to see that it's going to close it off, right? So you'll see that it closes that shape off. Well, let's say I want to draw a new triangle off of this. I'm still in the pen tool. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting. You'll notice that it still has that anchor activated. It doesn't matter if it's activated or not, but you'll notice I'm still in the pen tool. I want to attempt to draw a triangle from this. Do you kind of see how I can draw a triangle from this? All right, so I'm going to click here and look what happens. What happened? It erased the anchor, right? I don't want that to happen. So to avoid that, one of the things that I can do is I can start the triangle maybe away from it. So maybe I start here, then I click over here, then I click here, then I click here. And then when I'm done, I'll go to this location. So that's one way to avoid it. But frankly, I think that that's kind of, it's difficult to remember that. And it's also awkward to want to click somewhere else to start it all over again. So the software has a feature where it will turn off auto delete. Because what's happening is that the pen tool is automatically deleting that anchor that pre-exists. So the pen tool wants to auto delete it. You'll notice that when I hover over the anchor, I get that minus symbol. So that's called auto delete. Where is auto delete? Well, it's under the Illustrator preferences, under general. So here's the preference panel. And one of the things that you should be aware of when you look at a user interface, so this is part of a user interface. It's the options and features that are tied to the software. First of all, it's the first set of preferences that were activated. So that means it's the important set. It's the general set. It's how the overall software will work. Well, I want you to find the very first field that you can put a check mark next to it. And what does it say there? The very first one. Disable auto add and delete. Look, so it is a really important feature. It's something that, as an illustrator, you would want to turn it on and off depending on what you're doing. So in this situation, I want to disable it. So I'm going to click that button so that way when I go to a corner, it's not going to automatically delete it. a corner of a path that I've illustrated. It's not going to automatically delete it. Now this is really important because in the future, I may want auto add and delete. So I have to remember that I've activated this and then disable it if need be. So I actually got a request from a student this afternoon, and they were having problems with the pencil tool. It wasn't working correctly. And one of the first things that we did, I actually called her and we troubleshooted on the phone. One of the things that we did is we deleted the preferences. So if you delete or reset the preferences in Illustrator, what it does is it brings Illustrator to the beginning when you first launched it, you first installed it. So all the settings are at the default. So if you ever forget some of the buttons that you've activated or deactivated and you're kind of going, oh my gosh, I wish it was the way that it used to be, you can always reset the preferences. You can do a Google search and there's a series of hotkeys that you can use to have that happen. But you'll notice I checked disable auto add and delete. So now when I go to this object and I start on this corner, you're going to notice it no longer deletes it. Now I can just click here and here, hit escape to let go, and I'll draw another triangle from there to there. Hit escape and let go. So if you hit escape, it starts the pen tool all over again. So check this out. If I draw this much, see how the pen tool is showing the rubber band? That sort of preview of where it's going to draw next. If I hit escape, it lets go of it. It allows me to draw a new line. I hit escape, it lets me draw a new line. You can also, I believe, if you hit the P key, which is pen tool, it basically just starts the pen tool all over again. So if you make a mistake, what should you do? I just made a bunch of mistakes. What should I do? What's the easiest thing? Command Z it, right? So I'm going to hit Command Z, hit that a bunch of times. Now, if this was a file that I worked on last week and I opened it right now, can I Command Z the stuff from last week? No. So it's only recent things, okay? So I just want to make sure that everybody remembers that. So this is the poly method. So you'll notice that I'm just basically drawing little triangles, hitting escape, and I'll just draw a bunch of triangular looking shapes to capture some of the edges of the light and shadow areas. There are some student examples that I think that I share where students have used this strategy to illustrate their portraits. Does that make sense? So what do you think about this strategy? Do any of you think that it's interesting? I think it's interesting. Do any of you think that it seems tedious? Yeah, I also think it's tedious. It's a lot of work. Is this method better than the other? No, they all have merit. It's really a stylistic approach. It's sort of what do you want it to look like? What do you want it to do? Frankly, I think that some of the stylistic choices that you make should be driven by the meaning of their work or their style, the things that they do, the thing that they're interested in. So I think that there's one of the examples that I've shared with you. It's a portrait of Kusama. This artist's last name is Kusama, and there are a bunch of circles. You guys seen that one? It's really beautiful, right? Why do you think the student designer chose circles? Do any of you know why? Yes. What is her work based on? Dots. So she's obsessed with dots. And so it made sense that her portrait was illustrated by a network of circles. So what we're really illustrating here is a network of open paths. This network of open paths, we're going to turn it into a live paint group and apply the fills to it. So remember, live paint uses a network of open lines. They're not closed on to themselves. They don't have to be. But when we work with them collectively, turn it into a live paint group, then you can interactively paint. So that's going to be a question on your quiz, by the way. So hopefully you remember that. Okay, so this is the poly method, and as you can see, I could apply this triangular exploration throughout the whole portrait if I wanted to. Now, I want to show you another method that could be a possibility for you. Now, I know that this may not, at least when I present this, you might kind of go, oh my gosh, how did he do that? If it's something that you want to pursue, I can show you how to do this one-on-one. But I sort of don't want to spend an enormous amount of time showing it multiple times in front of the class, because there might be some people here who don't care to use that, okay? So let me show you one we'll look at one possibility, and then we'll look at something that's a little bit more complicated. So the Kusama example, it was a network of circles. So I'm going to write circles here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to illustrate a circle, and I'm going to create a network of circles. Now, I don't know if I think I've shared this with you in one of my lessons or tutorials, that if I hold the Alt key down, if I have an object selected and I hold the Alt key down, see how it turns into a double arrow? So that means drag and copy, right? Now, if I hit Command D, it repeats the last thing I just did to this object. So if I hit Command D, you'll notice it just repeats the circles for me. Does that make sense? All right, so here's a little network of circles. They almost look like tennis balls to me, or baseballs. All right, so I'll hit Command G. I just grouped them together, so now I can move them as a set. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Alt and drag. Right, something like that, Alt and drag. And then I'm going to hit Command D, oops, select the object, hit Command D again. So I'm basically making a screen right now. You guys see that? It's kind of like a screen pattern. Right now, I didn't make enough circles to capture his shoulders or his hair. So at this point, I could basically use this as a live paint group and fill all these tiny little fields. Okay, now, I think that might work. It might look okay, but one of the things that I like to do when I do this, I like to combine it with some organic line work. So I'm going to go back to this other file that I started a while ago, and I'm going to copy these lines, and I'm going to paste them here. Oh, let me show you a feature. I'm not sure if I go over this in my tutorial. So you'll notice that these lines, they're in a layer called what? Outline. So when I paste this new line work into the other file, I want two things to happen. I want it to paste in the exact same spot. So hopefully the lines will line up with the other picture. So they're going to paste in the exact same spot. And I also want the other file to know that all these lines live in this layer called outline. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the hamburger icon, and you'll notice that towards the bottom of the layer options, what does it say right there? Paste remember layers. So that means that when I copy this and I paste this somewhere else, it's going to remember the layer name, the layer orders, how everything is organized. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this, edit copy. Copy. All right, then I'm going to go to this file, and hopefully it's set up the same way. I don't know if it is. I could be wrong. Let's see what's going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and select edit, and look at all the paste features that we have. So I wanted to sit in the exact same spot. Which paste do you think I want to select? There's paste, paste in front, paste in back, paste in place, paste in artboard. What do you think? Paste in place. So let's try it and see what happens, okay? Now, go to paste in place. Say yes, go ahead. Oh, they didn't align, or they're not aligned exactly, but you'll notice that it did put my line work in the outline layer. So it did remember my layer name and the layer order. These didn't line up perfectly, but that's okay. I can always, nudge these into place, hopefully. Right, so let me turn this network off. All right, and here's my line work from the other file. It's not exactly right. I think this one's a little bit bigger or smaller. I can't tell. Smaller? Maybe I stretched my image. I think it's awkward. What did I do? All right, so let's see. Okay, so it's getting closer. Does that look close enough? I think that's close enough. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on this network of circles, and I have the network of organic lines, both of those on. So you'll notice that there's an edge right here that separates his skin from his hair. There's an edge right here that separates his hair from the background. So that's how these organic lines are going to help me. It's sort of refining that network a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of these lines, Command A, and I'm going to turn this into a live paint group. Can anybody tell me where do I do that? Where do I go? Live paint group. Object. Live paint. Make. Okay, good. So, oh, it's a live paint group. So you'll notice that when I selected the line work, there were some paths in the outline layer, and there were some paths in the circles layer. Because it grouped them together, it moved the line work from the outline layer and put it into the circle layer. Does that make sense? So if they're living in separate layers, it's going to group them together. It's going to grab everything and place it in the active layer. So here it is in the circle layer, and you'll notice that it put it in a group in a live paint group. So now that it's a live paint object, I can go ahead and start filling the values into this portrait. Okay? So can anybody tell me, what should I do next? Any advice? What should I do next? Change the color of one of the fields? Okay. Is there something else that maybe I could do before I start filling in the colors? What about the colors of the...
Well, I mean the template, the stroke.
That's exactly what I want to do. I want to change... Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the stroke. So you'll notice that now I don't see any of the paths. If I hit Command Y, I can see the network again. Right? It's Command Y, turn it back on. If I select the live paint group, even though it doesn't have the red strokes, I can still see the network when it's active. So I'm going to go into the live paint bucket now, and I'm going to zoom in. So, you know, this is where maybe if I was doing this at home or even here in class, I would probably put on some headphones and some really good music, you know, and just, or watch something interesting on TV, and I'm just going to jam on it, you know what I mean? Just sort of lose myself in the music and just do this. So I'm in the live paint bucket, and whoops. I'm in the live paint bucket. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to hit Alt, Sample, Fill, Alt, Sample, Fill, Alt, Sample, Fill, Alt, Sample, Fill. And I'll just, like I said, I'm just going to jam through it. And this is going to take me a little bit of time. But after a couple of songs, some great songs, I usually listen to like Pink Floyd or something like that to start off, and then I'll get something more aggressive later. But let's see. So I really I don't know what I'm filling right now. I have no clue what these little shapes are because I'm so zoomed in, I can't remember what they are. So have any of you worked on the orange yet? And the gradient mesh? That's kind of tedious too, right? Adding color to all those little anchors. I don't know if you guys have accomplished that tutorial yet, but there's you work with these little anchors on an interior network, and you have to select the anchors to add color to them. So there's a certain level of complexity and tediousness to that. All right, let me zoom out. Let's see what are we doing? Oh, we're working on his mustache, lip, and face. Click off of this. So that's what I've done so far. It looks a little weird. So one of the things that I have found with illustration is that there is what I call a tipping point. And what I mean by a tipping point is that you have to finish a certain amount of the illustration to really get a sense of whether or not it works. So, you know, I'm sort of starting off right now, and I'm having some hesitation about how accurate it looks. And, you know, I think it's too early for me to stop and say, you know what, I better start all over again. So I'm just going to go through here. Maybe these are all the same color, so I can just drop the same color over here. I also don't think that my line work, I don't think I lined it up correctly. It's a little bit off. So as you can see here, because of the complexity of those overlapping circles, like I said, this is kind of tedious. You know, this is not going to take a few minutes like your cartoon character. This is probably going to take a half hour or so. All right. Zoom out again. So I'm working on the shadow of his nose. Turn off the reference image. So this is it as it's slowly going along, as I'm moving along. Let me turn on some of the other examples that I've been working on. So here's the poly example. This is that crude polygon. Oh, this one's made up of triangles that I made. Whoa, 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 where'd that go? So this one's made up of triangles, a network of triangles. There's another example that I have where I made it out of a network of hexagons. So what I'm trying to describe to you is that there's more than one way to approach this problem. And I don't want you to feel like you only have to use this kind of organic representational method. If you want to use something that's a little bit more abstract or geometric, by all means you can do that. The only thing that I would caution you is that it's going to be a little bit more tedious because it's going to take more time to fill in all of these little parts. Does that make sense? I don't really want to sit here for the next half hour filling these in with color. I want to show you a file that one of my students put together that used a similar strategy, and that way you can see her completed project. Does that sound fair? Okay. Right. So here's the portrait. Do any of you know who this is?
Yes.
Who is it?
Barbara, I don't know.
Barbara.
Okay.
Starts with a K. Barbara Kruger. Yeah, it's Barbara Kruger. All right, so look. Do her shapes look somewhat similar to what I was just showing you? You can see the little circles there. Okay, and if I hit Command Y, let's look at the level of complexity to her circles. So you can see she cut up these little circles to tiny little fragments and then filled them in with the appropriate value. Right? And then when we zoom out, we get this sort of screen pattern illusion in the illustration. Let me hide the background. Pretty impressive, right? A little obsessive. She was an amazing student. But I just wanted you to show I wanted to show an example that followed a similar strategy to the one that I just presented. Let's take a look at her poster. Do you guys want to see how this was used later?
Yes.
So as you can see, it's an asset. So it's part of a larger project. And you will be creating a poster as well. There was a certain set of expectations to the project. She is missing a couple of assets that I requested, but that was something that she approved with me before she omitted them. So it was a conversation that she had with me. But in the end, your portrait will be used to create a poster as well. It's part of a poster. It's part of a bigger project. So I just wanted to show the context in which that was going to be presented. Does that make sense? So the point of this conversation was to convey that you don't have to draw it in this organic way, that you can use more of a geometric or abstract approach if you wanted to. What is important is that whatever strategy you use, that we can still extract the essence, the appearance of the person. If it looks like mud and I can't make out who it is, then it doesn't matter. Okay, so I need to be able to make sense and rationalize the portrait.